Have you ever noticed that some people do not need to defeat you to weaken you? They only need your attention. Not your money. Not your time. Not even your presence. Just your attention. Because the moment they can occupy your mind, they can start shaping your peace. And in a world built on outrage, comparison, fake concern, passive-aggressive politeness, and emotional manipulation, that is how most people get controlled without even realizing it. Here is the uncomfortable truth: a lot of your exhaustion is not coming from hard work. It is coming from mental trespassing. From giving space in your mind to people who have done nothing to earn that space. From replaying disrespect that should have ended in seconds. From carrying tones, looks, comments, messages, silence, rejection, and petty drama as if every disturbance deserves a permanent seat in your inner life. And that is exactly what this episode is about. In this video, we are going to uncover the deeper Stoic secret behind ignoring negativity, not as avoidance, not as coldness, and not as some ego game, but as a form of inner protection, self-command, and mental freedom. We are going to talk about why attention is power, why some people only feel strong when they can provoke you, why your internal dialogue matters more than most people realize, and why the real battle is not only with difficult people out there, but with the part of your own mind that keeps inviting them back in. And stay with me until the end, because the final lesson is where most people fail. They may learn how to walk away from toxic people, but they never learn how to walk away from the toxic replay inside themselves. That is where peace is either protected or lost. So if you have been feeling mentally crowded, emotionally overexposed, or strangely tired from things that should not have that much power over you, this message may meet you at exactly the right time. Let's begin. 1. A peaceful life does not begin when the world approves of you. It begins when you stop asking it to. One of the quietest ways people lose themselves is not through some dramatic collapse. It happens slowly. So slowly that most do not even notice it until they are exhausted, resentful, anxious, and emotionally dependent on reactions they cannot control. It starts in ordinary moments. You say something, then immediately scan the room to see how it landed. You make a decision, then check whether other people seem comfortable with it. You set a boundary, then feel guilty because someone looked disappointed. You choose yourself for once, then spend the next hour questioning whether you were too harsh, too cold, too selfish, too much. And little by little, your life stops being directed by values and starts being directed by reactions. That is one of the great hidden miseries of adulthood. Especially in modern life. Especially in workplaces, families, social circles, online spaces, and relationships where people rarely say exactly what they mean. They hint. They signal. They withdraw. They guilt you quietly. They reward you when you are useful, then punish you when you become inconvenient. They call it honesty, but often it is just emotional leverage dressed up in respectable language. Machiavelli would understand this part immediately. Society does not always reward virtue. Very often, it rewards compliance, softness, pleasantness, accessibility. It rewards the version of you that is easiest to use. And the moment you stop being easy to use, some people suddenly discover that you are difficult. That is not because you changed into something wrong. It is because your loyalty is no longer for sale. Stoicism becomes powerful right here. Marcus Aurelius kept reminding himself that the mind can choose how it sees things. Epictetus kept drawing the line between what is up to us and what is not. Seneca warned again and again about dependence on the crowd, because the crowd is unstable. The crowd praises what flatters it, resents what challenges it, and rarely gives clean, fair, lasting approval. So if your peace depends on approval, then your peace will always be fragile. One opinion can disturb it. One misunderstanding can collapse it. One cold reaction can make you question your entire direction. That is no way to live. A meaningful life starts when you become honest enough to ask yourself a harder question. What do I actually stand for when no one is clapping? Not what sounds noble. Not what keeps people comfortable. Not what protects your image. What do you stand for? Maybe it is self-respect. Maybe it is honesty. Maybe it is calm. Maybe it is discipline. Maybe it is the decision to stop betraying yourself just to remain acceptable in rooms that never truly valued you. Once that becomes clear, something shifts inside you. You stop over-explaining every choice to people who were committed to misunderstanding you anyway. You stop chasing after every false impression to correct it. You stop feeling responsible for managing the emotional reactions other people have to your growth. And that is where the practice of ignoring begins in its deepest form. Not as arrogance. Not as performance. Not as revenge. But as inner order. You are no longer ignoring people because you think you are above them. You are ignoring the noise that pulls you away from your center. You are ignoring the guilt that tempts you to abandon your values. You are ignoring the reactions that try to take more authority over your life than they deserve. That kind of strength does not look dramatic from the outside. But from the inside, it changes everything. Because a peaceful life was never going to come from being approved by everyone around you. It was always going to come from becoming so clear about your values that the world's noise begins to lose authority over your mind. And once that happens, not every voice gets to tell you who you are anymore. 2. The real goal is not just to ignore people. It is to stop letting the world settle inside you. A lot of people hear a message like this and misunderstand it. They think ignoring negativity means pretending not to care. They think it means becoming emotionally numb, acting detached, staying quiet on the outside while the inside is still on fire. But Stoicism asks for something much harder and much more honest than that. It asks, did the thing enter you? That is the real question. Because anyone can stay silent for a minute and still carry the poison for the next 6 hours. Anyone can avoid the argument and still replay it all night. Anyone can walk away from a rude conversation while their body stays tense, their mind keeps producing replies, and their emotional state gets hijacked for the rest of the day. That is not peace. That is delayed participation. The deeper work is learning how not to let external things settle inside you and start governing your inner atmosphere. Think about how modern life is designed. Your phone lights up before your nervous system is even awake. A message comes in with a strange tone. A coworker gives you a look. Someone posts something clearly aimed at you without saying your name. A family member says one small thing at breakfast that touches an old wound. Social media feeds you comparison before you have even had water. Headlines sell fear. Algorithms reward outrage. Entire industries profit from overstimulation, insecurity, and mental agitation. And then people wonder why they feel internally crowded. Epictetus said people are disturbed not by things, but by the views they take of them. That line becomes painfully real when you start watching your own mind with honesty. A delayed reply becomes rejection. A criticism becomes humiliation. Being ignored becomes proof that you do not matter. A cold look becomes a whole private narrative about your worth. The event itself may happen once. But the mind repeats it, enlarges it, personalizes it, and installs it as the emotional weather of the day. That is why the real training is not just external restraint. It is internal filtration. Marcus Aurelius knew that difficult people would always exist. selfish people, careless people, arrogant people, hypocrites, performers, people who wear virtue in public and practice manipulation in private. He did not expect the world to become emotionally clean. He trained himself not to become psychologically owned by what he encountered. That is inner sovereignty. Not passivity. Not weakness. Sovereignty. The refusal to let the world rent space in your mind without permission. This kind of self-mastery is built quietly, in tiny moments that look unimportant from the outside. You notice you are replaying a tone. You notice your breathing change because of a text. You catch yourself composing imaginary arguments in the shower. You feel the urge to prove, defend, explain, or emotionally chase resolution. And instead of feeding that impulse, you pause and ask a better question. Does this deserve space in me? Not, was that unfair? It may have been unfair. Not, was that disrespectful? It may have been disrespectful. The better question is, does it deserve to become part of my inner life? That question changes your standards. Because once you live that way, ignoring is no longer denial. It becomes discernment. You stop treating every emotional disturbance as sacred. You stop assuming every impression deserves your full cooperation. You stop living at the mercy of whoever touched your nervous system last. And the less available you become to external noise, the more stable your inner world becomes. You still notice things. You still see clearly. You still understand what is happening. But you stop absorbing every impact as if it were a command. That is what it means to become unaffected by the world around you. Not dead. Not empty. Not detached in some hollow way. But rooted. Calm enough to stay yourself in the presence of chaos. Strong enough to let small minds remain small without shrinking your whole day to their size. Free enough to choose your state instead of receiving it from whoever feels like disturbing you. 3. When you keep giving toxic people your attention, you teach them that they still matter. This is one of the hardest truths to accept, especially if you are a good-hearted person. Because good-hearted people often believe in explanation. They believe that if they just clarify better, stay calm enough, respond wisely enough, or give one more chance, the situation will finally shift. Sometimes it does. But toxic dynamics are rarely sustained by misunderstanding alone. They are sustained by access. That is the deeper reality. Attention is never neutral. Attention is energy. Attention is permission. Attention is a silent form of confirmation that says, you have reached me. You now have influence here. And that is why toxic people keep reaching for it even when they pretend not to care. Because for many of them, attention is power. They do not always want peace. They do not always want truth. They do not always want resolution. Very often, they want impact. They want to know they can still move something inside you. They want proof that their tone still changes your mood. That their silence still unsettles you. That their comment still lingers. That their presence can still bend the emotional direction of your day. You see this in offices all the time. A person makes little cutting remarks, always mild enough to stay deniable. Another one withholds warmth until you chase it. Someone else acts friendly in public and punishes in private. A superior gives mixed signals to keep you off balance. A family member uses guilt as if it were love. An ex returns not because they want repair, but because they want to confirm they still have emotional access. And every time you react with visible agitation, over-explanation, frustration, or mental obsession, You reinforce the belief that they still matter in ways they should not. Seneca understood something important here. The mind must be protected from useless disturbance, not because the world becomes reasonable, but because your peace is too valuable to keep placing in careless hands. Some people do not grow calmer when you give them more attention. They grow bolder. They read your repeated engagement as proof that they still occupy space in your life. Even your frustration can flatter them. Because frustration still says, "You got through." That is why constant reaction becomes dangerous. Not only because it drains you, but because it teaches the wrong lesson. It teaches the other person that they can still interrupt your balance whenever they choose. It teaches them that your silence can be broken. That your focus can be shaken. That your inner state can still be altered on command. And what you reward tends to repeat. What you energize tends to expand. What you answer too often begins to believe it deserves an answer. So part of Stoic self-control is learning to stop feeding patterns that injure you. Sometimes that looks very plain from the outside. No long explanation. No attempt to get the last word. No emotional performance. Just restraint. Just quiet. Just the decision not to keep watering something that should have dried up a long time ago. And yes, this feels uncomfortable at first. Because when you stop giving toxic people your attention, you stop playing the role they assigned to you. You stop being the fixer, the responder, the defender, the one who can be pulled back in with a look, a message, a tone. You become less available to the cycle. And whenever a cycle is broken, there is often resistance. They may escalate. They may act offended. They may push harder. They may become suddenly dramatic. But that does not always mean you are wrong. Very often, it means the old access is beginning to disappear. And that is where strength has to deepen. Because real freedom begins when you understand that not every person who reaches for your attention deserves to receive it. Not every voice deserves a seat at your table. Not every provocation deserves your nervous system. Not every toxic presence deserves proof that they still matter to your inner world. And the less you feed what harms your peace, the weaker it becomes. One day, almost quietly, you notice the shift. The people who once disturbed you no longer feel powerful. The patterns that once felt magnetic no longer pull you in. The urge to answer, prove, or defend begins to fade. Not because they improved, but because you stopped confirming their importance with your energy. That is when ignoring stops looking like silence and starts looking like self-respect. For, the moment you stop responding, borrowed power begins to collapse. There is something strange you learn as you get older. Some people never had real power over you. They only had borrowed power. Borrowed from your reactions. Borrowed from your anxiety. Borrowed from your need to explain yourself. Borrowed from your discomfort with being misunderstood. Borrowed from your habit of stepping into every emotional trap as if it were your moral responsibility to clean it up. That is why certain people look bigger than they really are for so long. Not because they are truly strong, but because your reactions keep lending them strength. They know what tone unsettles you. They know which accusation makes you defend yourself. They know which silence makes you chase. They know how to leave things unresolved so your mind will keep working for them long after they have left the room. That is not depth. That is leverage. And many people confuse leverage with strength. Machiavelli saw a hard truth that still applies now: a person does not need virtue if they can master appearances and reactions. In social life, in politics, in business, in families, In relationships, many people survive by learning how to control perception, not by becoming noble. They do not always need to be right. They only need to create confusion, doubt, pressure, or emotional imbalance. But borrowed power collapses when the reaction stops. It fades when you do not answer the bait. It fades when you stop correcting every false impression. It fades when you refuse to turn every provocation into a full emotional event. It fades when your nervous system no longer rises every time their energy enters the room. This is why Stoicism is so practical. Epictetus kept returning to the same truth: if something outside you can constantly dictate your inner state, your freedom is incomplete. And the first sign of recovering that freedom is often restraint. Not dramatic restraint. Quiet restraint. The kind that says, "I see what this is, and I am not stepping into it." That changes everything. Drama survives through participation. It needs heat. It needs response. It needs replay. It needs the oxygen of attention. Remove that, and it starts collapsing under its own emptiness. A manipulative comment lands differently when it is not followed by panic. A guilt-filled message loses force when it is not rewarded with immediate self-abandonment. A person who is used to controlling the emotional tone of your day becomes much less powerful when your state no longer changes every time they try. But here is where many people fail: they stop answering with their mouth, yet continue answering with their mind. Outward silence. Inward chaos. That is not full freedom yet. The real work is deeper. You stop answering externally, yes. But then you also stop letting your mind continue the scene for hours. You stop building your day around their instability. You stop treating every emotional disturbance like an emergency. You stop mentally kneeling before whatever most recently tried to provoke you. Little by little, what once felt heavy begins to feel smaller. Not because the other person transformed, but because the connection between their behavior and your inner state is breaking. At first, that can feel unnatural. There is often discomfort when you stop playing a role you have played for years. But discomfort is not always a sign of failure. Sometimes it is simply the sensation of an unhealthy pattern losing its grip. Sometimes it is your nervous system learning a new truth: not every emotional invitation must be accepted. Marcus Aurelius understood that dignity often looks simple. No obsession with winning. No desperate need to be seen as right. No wrestling with every difficult person until the universe declares you the victor. Just a steady return to reason. To proportion. To self-command. That is the deeper power here. You are not trying to destroy the other person. You are refusing to keep empowering what disturbs your peace. And once you live this way, something beautiful happens. Situations that once consumed you start passing through without taking over. People who once knew exactly how to shake you no longer find the same access point. Their words may still exist. Their behavior may still be ugly. But it no longer enters you the same way. The door is not as open as it used to be. That is real power. Not controlling others. Not forcing respect. Not winning every argument. Real power is when someone tries to pull you into disorder and finds there is nothing in you willing to leave its center. 5. Ignoring is not a social trick. It is a tool for mental freedom. A lot of people hear the word ignore and think only of behavior. Do not text back. Do not argue. Do not react. Do not engage. That is part of it, but it is only the surface. At a deeper level, ignoring is a tool for mental freedom. Because the mind becomes trapped not only by people, but by impressions, loops, projections, and emotional residue. A distracted mind is rarely a free mind. And modern life is built to make your mind excessively available. A comment can ruin a mood. A delay can alter an entire day. One passive-aggressive message can stay in your chest while you are trying to work. One careless sentence can replay while you are driving, eating, resting, or sitting with someone you love. That is how people lose inner freedom. Not only through tragedy, but through constant small captures of attention. And the dangerous part is that many of those captures feel justified. Of course you are thinking about it. Of course it bothered you. Of course you want to understand why they acted that way. Why they became cold. Why they said that. Why they ignored you. Why they changed. But Stoicism does not say those things never sting. It says your first reaction does not need to become your permanent residence. That is where freedom begins. Epictetus understood this deeply. What matters most is not what is happening around you, but what authority it has been given within you. That line cuts straight through modern suffering. Because most people are not only dealing with life. They are also dealing with what life has been allowed to become inside their minds. Something knocks on the door of your consciousness. A tone. A memory. A look. A headline. A judgment. A comparison. And without realizing it, you open the door, offer it a chair, pour it a drink, and let it rearrange the furniture. Then later you say you feel overwhelmed. Of course you do. Too many things have been given permission to stay. When you start living more deliberately, ignoring stops feeling rude. It starts feeling clean. It feels like protecting the conditions under which clarity can exist. Because clarity needs space. Judgment needs space. Your own thoughts need space. Your values need space. Your healing needs space. Without that space, your life becomes crowded by things that do not deserve that level of importance. Seneca often wrote about guarding the mind against useless agitation. There is something deeply compassionate in that idea. A peaceful mind does not happen by accident. It is built through repeated acts of refusal. Refusing to chase every explanation. Refusing to relive every insult. Refusing to internalize every projection. Refusing to let every emotional spark become a fire. That does not make you detached from life. It makes you available for the right parts of life. You become more present. More stable. More thoughtful. More focused. Because when your energy is no longer leaking into every pointless disturbance, you suddenly have more of yourself. More patience. More calm. More room to work on your own growth instead of staying mentally tied to the behavior of people who are still at war with themselves. And that is the quiet beauty of this practice. Ignoring is not empty. It gives something back to you. Every unnecessary thing you stop feeding returns a little energy to your own life. Every battle you refuse that never deserved your spirit makes you lighter. Every time you choose not to carry what should have ended already, you reclaim another piece of your freedom. So yes, from the outside it may look simple. But from the inside, it is one of the strongest forms of liberation there is. Because the person who no longer feels obligated to engage with every disturbance is no longer easy to control. And that is what mental freedom really is. Not the absence of noise, but the ability to remain inwardly unowned by it. 6. Your attention is writing your inner life every day. There is a truth that changes everything once you really feel it. Your attention is not a small thing. It is authorship. Whatever keeps getting your mental energy starts becoming your inner world. Whatever you revisit again and again begins shaping your mood, your focus, your decisions, your identity, and even the emotional climate through which you interpret reality. That is why attention matters so much. Because people often think reality is made only of external events. What happened? What was said? Who disappointed me? Who judged me? Who disrespected me? Who ignored me? But your lived reality is not just what happens around you. It is also what your mind keeps magnifying. It is what your thoughts keep circling. It is what your nervous system keeps preparing for. Two people can go through similar situations and live in completely different inner worlds because one keeps surrendering attention to what disturbs them, while the other learns how to return attention to what is useful, true, and under their control. That is why this is not just about peace. It is about reality formation. A lot of people are living inside realities built by irritation, by comparison, by old wounds, by the memory of disrespect, by resentment they keep refreshing like a page, by imagined conversations that never happen, by psychological loyalty to things they say they want to move beyond. And because attention is creative, the more they feed those things, the more those things become the atmosphere of their life. Marcus Aurelius kept reminding himself to return to his ruling mind. Not because the world would stop being chaotic, but because the mind that belongs to everyone else eventually belongs to no one. If every opinion can enter you, then your life is always being edited by forces that do not care about your peace. If every irritation can shape your state, then your inner world is permanently vulnerable to whatever happens to be loudest that day. That is not just distraction. That is a loss of inner government. Maybe you know that feeling. You wake up with decent intentions. Then one message changes your mood. One person's attitude follows you for hours. One memory reopens something old. One small act of disrespect keeps replaying while you are trying to work. The day keeps moving, but your mind is stuck elsewhere, feeding something that does not deserve that power. The tragedy is not only that it drains you. It is that it steals your creative force. Energy that could have gone into building, healing, focusing, loving, improving, or simply being present gets spent managing disturbances that never deserved that degree of intimacy. That is why ignoring is not passive. It is creative. Because when you stop handing your attention to everything that disturbs you, you begin to notice what was waiting underneath all that noise. Clarity. Direction. Better judgment. A calmer emotional rhythm. A stronger connection to your own thoughts. You begin to hear yourself again. And when that happens, life feels less like something that keeps happening to you and more like something you are consciously participating in. That is what it means to take back your reality. Not in some magical way. In a practical one. You stop letting the worst thing around you become the main thing within you. You stop building your inner life around external disorder. You stop allowing other people's confusion to become your mental climate. From that place, your choices become cleaner. Your reactions become slower. Your focus becomes sharper. Your world reflects more of your intention and less of your irritation. Seneca would probably call this a high form of self-protection. Not the protection of your image. The protection of your consciousness. Because once your attention is scattered, your strength is scattered. And once your attention is reclaimed, your strength returns with it. Then you begin asking a better question whenever something tries to occupy you. Is this shaping me in the direction I want to go? If the answer is no, maybe it does not deserve another hour. Maybe it does not deserve another replay. Maybe it does not deserve one more seat inside your mind. That is the turning point. The moment you realize your attention is your power. Your authorship. The invisible force that keeps writing your inner life. And when you stop giving that force away so easily, you do not just feel calmer. You become more deliberate, more grounded, and much harder to disturb. 7. When people cannot get the reaction they want, they are often left with nothing. There are people who do not truly want understanding. They want reaction. They want the shift in your face. The long message. The defensive tone. The visible frustration. The proof that they still know how to touch a nerve inside you. Once you see that clearly, a lot of confusing behavior becomes simple. Some conversations were never about truth. Some comments were never about resolution. Some provocations were never about the actual issue. They were about access. They were about control. They were about entering your emotional space and leaving with evidence that they still could. That is why your reaction becomes so valuable. Not because you are weak. Because emotion reveals information. The moment you react exactly how someone hoped you would, you show them where the door is. You show them what still hurts. What still unsettles you. What still makes you abandon your center. And for a manipulative person, that is enough. They do not need depth if they can get movement. They do not need fairness if they can create confusion. They do not need truth if they can secure emotional impact. This is why Stoicism places such heavy emphasis on self-command. Marcus Aurelius did not train calm because calm looks elegant. He trained it because the person who cannot govern their internal response is too easy for the world to steer. Seneca understood that many forms of conflict survive not because they are strong in themselves, but because we keep feeding them with agitation. That is the heart of this lesson. Some people only have power while your emotions are available to them. The moment you stop providing that fuel, the whole dynamic starts changing. Suddenly they are speaking but nothing lands the same way. They are reaching but there is no grip. They are pulling but there is no immediate opening, no quick collapse, no dramatic payoff. For someone who relied on emotional access, that feels like emptiness. Because once the reaction disappears, what they were standing on begins to disappear too. This does not mean you become robotic. It does not mean you feel nothing. It means you stop turning every internal feeling into external evidence. That distinction matters. You may still notice the disrespect. You may still understand the attempt. You may still feel the pull. But you do not hand it back to them as proof that they still have reach. Sometimes strength is not saying the perfect line. Sometimes strength is the look that does not break. The pause that does not rush to defend itself. The silence that refuses to become a stage for someone else's disorder. Think about how many situations in life kept going only because both sides kept feeding them. One person throws something sharp. The other reacts. That reaction creates more material. Then another reaction. Another explanation. Another attempt to correct, defend, clarify, settle the score. Before long, the whole thing is alive, growing, feeding on attention. But remove one thing, the emotional supply, and the cycle begins to weaken. Not always instantly. Not always neatly. But undeniably. Marcus Aurelius would probably say your mind becomes stronger every time it refuses to become a theater for someone else's chaos. And that is exactly what this is. You are no longer offering your nervous system as proof of their importance. You are no longer making your peace negotiable because someone wants access to it. You are no longer allowing another person's immaturity, envy, bitterness, or emotional hunger to decide the rhythm of your inner world. That is real self-control. And yes, in the beginning, it feels strange. When you are used to reacting, silence feels unnatural. When you are used to defending yourself, composure can feel like weakness. When you are used to proving your intentions, saying less can feel almost painful. But much of that discomfort is just an old habit losing its throne. You are learning that your feelings do not owe themselves to every situation. You are learning that not every pull deserves movement. And once that lesson settles, something inside you becomes harder to shake. The people who once depended on your reaction start losing their effect. Their methods begin to look smaller. Their words feel thinner. Their efforts become more obvious. Not because they changed, but because you finally saw the mechanism without stepping into it. That is deeper freedom. When you stop giving people the emotional reaction they want, you do not just frustrate manipulation. You reclaim authority. You send a message without saying a word. My inner life is no longer public property. 8. The hardest thing to ignore is often not the person. It is the echo they leave behind. At a certain point, you realize the real battle is not only external. The hardest person to ignore is sometimes the one no longer in front of you. It is the voice that stays behind. The replay. The mental argument. The private wound that keeps asking for one more explanation, one more review, one more emotional turn around the same old circle. That is where the deeper Stoic work begins. Because ignoring other people can protect your peace for a moment. But learning to ignore the chaos that keeps echoing inside you is what actually changes your life. This is the part nobody sees. From the outside, you may look composed. You did not react. You walked away. You kept your dignity. But inside, the entire scene may still be alive. Their words are still moving through your head. Their disrespect is still sitting in your chest. Their tone is still replaying as if your mind believes one more review will finally solve something. That is how many people lose the peace they thought they had protected. They escaped the outer conflict. But they carried the inner version home with them. That is why the true power of ignoring must become an inner discipline. The discipline of noticing when your mind is continuing a drama that has already ended. The discipline of catching the old reflex that keeps feeding pain with attention. The discipline of realizing that not every thought deserves a conversation and not every emotion deserves an endless seat at the center of your day. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is not to fight every thought. It is to stop bowing to each one as if it were important. Epictetus would understand this immediately. Freedom is not just freedom from difficult people. It is freedom from becoming ruled by the impressions they leave behind. Because sometimes the real captor is no longer outside you. Sometimes it is the judgment inside you that keeps saying, "This should not have happened. I should have said more. I should have defended myself better. I should not still care." Now the mind is not only carrying the moment. It is attacking itself for still carrying it. That creates a second layer of suffering. First the event happens. Then the mind refuses to release it. Then shame appears because you are still thinking about it. Then frustration appears because you thought you were stronger than this. Then the inner dialogue becomes louder than the original event ever was. This is why inner mastery matters so much. If you do not learn how to ignore certain thoughts, certain impulses, certain emotional loops, you can remove yourself from toxic people and still remain privately tied to them for months. Marcus Aurelius spoke often about returning to the ruling mind. That lesson becomes painfully practical here. Your mind has to learn how to return home. Not once. Repeatedly. Not in some dramatic mystical way. In ordinary moments. You notice the replay begin again. You notice the anger asking for more fuel. You notice the internal speech being drafted for an audience that is not even in the room. And gently, firmly, you pull your attention back. Not because nothing happened. Not because it did not hurt. But because your inner world cannot remain forever occupied by what has already passed. That is the hidden side of self-control. Sometimes it is not visible restraint. Sometimes it is private refusal. Refusal to keep reopening the same wound. Refusal to let one person's behavior become the climate inside your mind. Refusal to keep granting emotional importance to something already over in the outer world. Seneca might call this one of the highest forms of self-protection. Because now you are not only guarding the gates of your life from other people. You are guarding the gates of your consciousness from unnecessary suffering. And that changes everything. Because once you learn to ignore the destructive voice within, the part that relives, exaggerates, personalizes, and deepens every disturbance, you become far harder to imprison from the inside. You stop being dragged around by every thought that arrives with urgency. You stop assuming every emotional wave carries truth. You begin to see that peace is not only about who you let around you. It is also about which inner patterns you keep entertaining. That is when ignoring becomes complete. Not when you silence the world alone. But when you also stop letting your own mind turn every disturbance into a home. 9. Real strength is not just controlling your expression. It is controlling your internal dialogue. A lot of people think strength is public. The calm face. The firm voice. The ability to stay composed when life gets difficult. And yes, that is part of it. But the deeper strength, the one that decides the real quality of your life, is much quieter than that. It happens in private. It happens in the way you speak to yourself after something painful, embarrassing, unfair, disappointing, or confusing takes place. Because long before the world defeats a person, their inner dialogue usually does. That is where everything either breaks or becomes stronger. You can survive a hard moment and still be damaged by the way you interpret it afterward. One rejection becomes, I am not enough. One mistake becomes, I always ruin everything. One cold reply becomes, I do not matter. One delay becomes, nothing ever works for me. The mind says these things so quickly, so automatically, that they begin to feel like truth. But they are not truth. They are interpretations. Often shaped by fear. Old wounds. Insecurity. Fatigue. Habit. And if you do not learn how to govern that inner voice, you can look composed on the outside while your mind quietly works against you on the inside. That is why this matters so much. Because the voice within does not only describe your life. It shapes it. It influences courage, confidence, patience, recovery, consistency, resilience, and the ability to keep going when no one is watching. If your internal dialogue is harsh, dramatic, hopeless, reactive, or self-punishing, even ordinary struggle starts feeling unbearable. Not because life is always crushing. Because your own mind is adding weight to every experience. Epictetus understood that the real problem is often not the event itself, but the judgment attached to it. That teaching becomes personal when you start listening to how you speak to yourself. Because many times the event passes, but the inner commentary keeps going. It keeps labeling, predicting, condemning, enlarging. It keeps saying, this is terrible. This means something is wrong with me. This proves I am failing. This is never going to change. Before long, the suffering is no longer mainly coming from the world. It is coming from the unchecked voice interpreting the world. That is where real self-control begins. Not by suppressing feeling. Not by pretending you never get hurt. But by interrupting destructive inner language before it becomes identity. Marcus Aurelius kept correcting his own mind constantly. Not because he never had hard thoughts, but because he knew the mind must be trained back to proportion. Otherwise it wanders into fear, self-pity, bitterness, and mental theater. Maybe you know that feeling. Something small happens, but inside the reaction becomes much bigger. The mind builds a whole story around one moment. One awkward silence becomes proof of rejection. One hard day becomes evidence that your whole life is off course. That is not reality speaking. That is untrained inner dialogue taking control of the room. The Stoic path does not ask you to become emotionless. It asks you to become aware. To hear the voice and question it. To ask, is this true, or is this fear? Is this useful, or is this making me weaker? Would I speak this way to someone I love? Because if the answer is no, maybe it should not be the voice governing your life either. Sometimes controlling your internal dialogue looks simple. Refusing to let one bad moment define the whole day. Replacing, "I cannot handle this," with, "I am uncomfortable, but I can stay steady." Not letting pain become identity. Not letting disappointment turn into self-hatred. Not letting confusion become a verdict on your future. Seneca knew the mind can become either a shelter or a tormentor. That choice matters more than most people realize. Because wherever you go, your inner voice goes with you. Into work. Into love. Into healing. Into solitude. Into every challenge you face. If that voice is always feeding fear, shame, resentment, and exhaustion, then even success will feel unstable. But if that voice becomes steadier, wiser, cleaner, more disciplined, life feels different from the inside out. That is real power. Not because you never struggle, but because your mind no longer turns every struggle into a deeper wound. Not because life becomes quiet, but because your inner world becomes guided by something stronger than noise. And once that happens, you stop being such an easy target for the world. Because a person who can govern their internal dialogue is much harder to break, much harder to manipulate, and much harder to pull into despair. 10. When you ignore noise, you recover the space required for a meaningful life. One of the most dangerous things about modern life is that it does not always destroy us with major tragedies. Sometimes it weakens us through interruption. A little noise here. A little negativity there. One useless comparison. One draining conversation. One pointless conflict. One more emotional distraction. None of it looks huge on its own. But together, it creates a life that feels mentally crowded. You sit down to think, but your mind is already full. You try to move forward, but your energy is scattered. You want peace, but there is always something loud and small pulling your attention away from what actually matters. That is why ignoring becomes essential. Because focus needs space. Healing needs space. Clarity needs space. Discipline needs space. Presence needs space. Love needs space. Purpose needs space. And if every irritation, every opinion, every provocation, every ambient negativity is allowed to enter and settle inside you, then the deepest parts of life begin to suffocate quietly. Marcus Aurelius understood this intimately. He knew the world would always generate noise. Ego. Chaos. False judgments. Petty people. vanity, disorder. None of that was going away. So the real question was never how do I create a perfect world around me. It was, how do I protect the inner space where reason, character, and purpose can still remain clear? That is the work. Because once your inner world is crowded, you start losing contact with what matters most. You lose contact with your goals because you are too busy processing other people. You lose contact with your values because you are always reacting instead of choosing. You lose contact with your peace because the mind is overstimulated and half busy with things that do not deserve you. And the painful part is that many of these distractions only grow because they keep being fed. Epictetus would bring this back to one simple truth: attention is a choice, even when at first it does not feel like one. Not every thought deserves continuation. Not every disturbance deserves investment. Not every piece of noise deserves to become part of your day. The more deeply you understand that, the more carefully you begin protecting your mind. You stop living as if everything deserves access. You stop treating every distraction like a moral obligation. You begin to realize that saying no inwardly is sometimes the most life-giving thing you can do. And when that happens, something beautiful returns. Space. Space to think before reacting. Space to remember your priorities. Space to work on what you keep saying matters to you. Space to rest without carrying 10 unnecessary burdens into the evening. Space to hear your own deeper voice again beneath the static. That is when life begins to simplify. Not because everything is fixed, but because your attention is no longer being wasted on things that make you smaller, weaker, and more scattered. Seneca warned about the mind being agitated by too many useless concerns. That warning feels almost prophetic now. There is always something asking for a reaction. Another headline. Another opinion. Another tension. Another small emotional trap. If you do not learn to ignore deliberately, life becomes a chain of interruptions. You may look busy, mentally active, emotionally involved, but deep down, nothing important is being built. That is the hidden cost of noise. It does not only disturb your peace. It steals your future by stealing your focus. Because anything meaningful asks something from you. A stronger character asks for reflection. A better life asks for consistency. Healing asks for emotional room. Purpose asks for directed attention. Love asks for presence. Growth asks for repeated effort. None of these things deepen in a mind that is always being dragged away by what is petty, loud, negative, or meaningless. So when you ignore distractions, you are not becoming detached from life. You are becoming available for a better one. You are choosing depth over noise. Purpose over reaction. Inner order over mental clutter. You are deciding that your mind will no longer be a public hallway where every passing disturbance gets to walk in. That decision changes daily life. You become calmer, yes, but also more effective, more grounded, more intentional. You waste less time emotionally circling what does not deserve you. You recover faster from nonsense. You return more easily to your work, your values, and your real direction. And slowly, almost without drama, your life begins to gather around what is essential instead of what is loud. That is power. Not flashy power. Not social power. The power to keep building a life while the world remains noisy. 11. Presence is the ability to remain here without being swallowed by everything out there. There is a difference between living in the world and being consumed by it. A lot of pain begins when that line disappears. You wake up. Check one message. Feel one shift in someone's tone. Notice one pressure, one tension, one problem. Suddenly your whole inner state begins bending around it. Your body is here, but your mind is already somewhere else. That is how many people lose entire days. They are physically present, but psychologically absent from their own lives. Trapped inside something that touched them. That is why presence is such a serious form of strength. Not the shallow kind people talk about when they say, just be in the moment, as if peace could be summoned by one pretty sentence. Real presence is harder than that. Real presence means staying rooted in yourself while life is still being life. It means feeling what is happening without becoming mentally kidnapped by it. It means noticing the noise around you without letting it invade every room inside you. Marcus Aurelius did not live in a quiet world. Seneca did not write from a protected bubble. Epictetus did not teach inner freedom because life had been gentle with him. They all knew something essential. Peace is not found by escaping reality. Peace is found by remaining inwardly steady inside reality. That is a very different thing. Because often the problem is not only what is happening. It is how quickly the mind gets pulled away from what is actually here. One comment sends you into an imagined argument. One disappointment sends you into future fear. One act of disrespect sends you into replay and analysis. Now, even when nothing more is happening, your inner life is somewhere else, consumed by something that already passed or has not even happened yet. That is not presence. That is possession. And most people do not realize how often they live like this. They eat while thinking about conflict. They work while replaying conversations. They rest while carrying stress from people not even in the room. They sit with people they love while mentally arguing with someone else. The body remains in one place. The mind keeps leaving. That is how life begins to feel thin, scattered, half-lived. The Stoic path invites something stronger. Return. Return to the breath. Return to the task in front of you. Return to the value you chose. Return to what is actually happening instead of what your anxious mind keeps expanding. Seneca might say wisdom includes refusing to suffer more than reality requires. That is exactly what presence protects you from. It protects you from living 3 layers beyond the moment. Because when you are truly present, many things lose their exaggerated power. A rude person still exists, but they do not get your whole day. A disappointment still hurts, but it does not become your identity. A problem still needs attention, but it does not become the atmosphere of your entire mind. Presence gives things their right size. It stops the mind from turning every difficulty into a total environment. And that is such a beautiful form of control. Not controlling outcomes. Not controlling people. Controlling the doorway between what happens around you and what takes over within you. That doorway matters more than most people know. If everything enters unchecked, your inner life becomes crowded and unstable. But if you learn how to stay awake, notice, pause, and remain with yourself while the world keeps moving, something inside you becomes much less easy to disturb. You begin experiencing moments more fully. Walking. Eating. Working. Resting. Listening. Life regains texture because you are actually there for it instead of constantly being pulled away by everything outside you. And maybe that is one of the deepest powers of ignoring. It gives you your presence back. It allows you to say without saying. Yes, the world is noisy. Yes, people are difficult. Yes, life is imperfect. But I will not disappear into all of it. I will remain here. I will remain with myself. I will remain available for what is real, necessary, and mine to live. That is not cold detachment. That is maturity. That is inner discipline. That is the quiet strength of someone who can stand in the middle of life without being emotionally carried away by every passing storm. 12. When you stop seeking validation and start building from self-respect, your growth becomes hard to stop. There comes a moment in life when you begin to see how much energy has been wasted trying to be seen correctly. Trying to be appreciated enough. Understood enough. Admired enough. Chosen enough. And maybe nobody ever said it directly, but somewhere along the way, you learn to measure yourself through response. Through praise. Through how warmly people received you. Through whether they noticed your effort. Through whether they confirmed that you mattered. That habit is heavy. Because it makes your peace depend on something unstable. This is why many people stay emotionally fragile while trying to become stronger. They work on themselves but secretly hope everyone notices. They set boundaries but still wait to be approved for them. They heal but keep checking whether others are impressed. They grow but still look sideways for confirmation that growth is visible. The problem is not only that this is exhausting. The deeper problem is that it keeps your center outside of you. It keeps your worth standing in a room full of unstable opinions. Stoicism offers a much deeper kind of power. Marcus Aurelius kept pulling himself back from the crowd and back toward character. Epictetus kept reminding people that freedom begins when you stop attaching your peace to what is not yours to command. Seneca warned about dependence on public approval because the crowd is inconsistent, emotional, distracted, and often incapable of recognizing what is truly good. When you really absorb that, something loosens. You stop asking the world to certify your becoming. And that is when real growth starts becoming clean. You are not improving to create an image. You are improving because you are tired of abandoning yourself. You are not becoming more disciplined so people can admire your control. You are becoming more disciplined because your life feels better when governed from within. You are not choosing peace so others will call you mature. You are choosing peace because chaos has already cost you enough. That shift changes everything. Growth stops being performance. It becomes transformation. And that is a form of power very few people can interrupt. Because once your growth is no longer tied to applause, rejection loses much of its old force. Neglect loses some of its sting. Being misunderstood stops feeling like an identity crisis. Someone failing to appreciate you no longer becomes proof that you are on the wrong path. Why? Because your path is no longer being built through their eyes. It is being built through your own repeated commitment to becoming calmer, wiser, clearer, and more solid from the inside out. That is what makes this power feel unstoppable. It does not need constant encouragement. It does not collapse every time someone doubts you. It does not fade when praise disappears. It does not panic when attention moves elsewhere. It keeps moving because it is rooted in something deeper than approval. It is rooted in self-respect. And self-respect changes everything quietly. It changes how you spend your time. It changes what you tolerate. It changes how fast you return to yourself after being disturbed. It changes which conversations you stop entertaining. It changes how much of your life you stop wasting trying to convince people to see your value. At some point, you understand that growth keeps slowing down every time you keep looking sideways for validation instead of inward for alignment. That does not mean you stop caring about people. It does not mean you become emotionally closed. It means you stop depending on external praise to stay loyal to your own path. You stop treating recognition as fuel. You stop confusing visibility with value. You stop building your emotional life around whether people are clapping at the right moment. Marcus Aurelius would probably tell you the task is to be good, not to appear good. There is enormous freedom in that. The second you stop curating yourself for approval, you recover an extraordinary amount of energy. Energy that can now go into healing, work, discipline, peace, purpose, daily effort, real becoming. And once you begin living that way, people may still misunderstand you. Some may overlook you. Some may only value you when you are useful. Some may never fully see who you are becoming. But none of that carries the same authority anymore. Because your growth is no longer waiting for permission. It has become private, steady, rooted, real. That is why this power is difficult to stop. A person who still needs validation can be delayed by silence, shaken by criticism, distracted by opinions. But a person who has turned inward and committed to growth for its own sake becomes harder to manipulate. They do not need the room to believe in them before they act. They do not need immediate results to stay faithful. They do not need endless reassurance to continue becoming. They keep going because they have finally understood something deep. The highest form of success is not being validated by the world. It is becoming someone you no longer have to betray in order to be loved. And once that becomes true in your life, a quiet strength begins to rise. Not loud strength. Not performative strength. Just the kind that does not chase, does not beg, does not collapse, and does not need to announce itself. The kind that keeps growing whether anyone notices or not. That is unstoppable. What ignoring negativity really means. So let's bring all of this together. Ignoring negativity is not about pretending life is easy. It is not about becoming cold. It is not about playing superiority games. It is not about social punishment. It is about self-command. It is about understanding that your attention is power, and not everything deserves access to it. It is about knowing that some people only feel strong when they can provoke you. It is about recognizing that reaction can become a reward. It is about learning that the real battle is not only with the person in front of you, but with the echo they leave inside your mind. It is about seeing how your internal dialogue can either become your shelter or your saboteur. It is about protecting the mental space required for clarity, focus, healing, presence, and purpose. And most of all, it is about reclaiming your inner life from everything that wants to occupy it without earning the right. Because that is the hidden war of modern life. Not every attack looks like an attack. Some arrive as a tone, a headline, a comparison, a passive-aggressive message, a silent withdrawal, a fake smile, a social performance, a memory, a thought loop, a hunger for validation, a need to be understood by people who were never trying to understand you in the first place. Stoicism teaches you to see through that. Machiavellian realism teaches you not to be naive about it. And together, they offer something rare. Not bitterness. Not paranoia. But clarity. The clarity to see how the world works without surrendering your mind to it. The clarity to know that social life is often full of hidden motives, emotional games, and appearances. The clarity to understand that some people are not confused, they are strategic. And the maturity to realize that the strongest response is often not a louder reaction, but cleaner self-possession. If this message spoke to something real in you, remember this. Peace does not begin when the world becomes fair. Peace begins when not everything gets access to you. The day you stop treating every disturbance like it deserves residence in your mind is the day your life starts belonging to you again. And maybe that is the deeper secret most people miss. Real strength is not found in controlling people. It is found in no longer being so easily controlled by them. So take a breath. Look at your life honestly. What have you been feeding that should have been left unfed? Whose voice still occupies too much of your mind? What thought keeps replaying because some part of you still thinks suffering it longer will somehow solve it? And what could change if you stopped giving that noise the authority it never deserved? If this helped you, subscribe and stay close. There is much more here on Stoicism, emotional discipline, inner peace, self-respect, and the kind of strength that does not need to shout to be real. And I want to leave you with one question. What is one source of negativity you need to stop giving your attention to this week? Drop it in the comments. Not for performance. Not for perfection. Just as a decision. A quiet one. A serious one. Because sometimes the first step toward freedom is simply refusing to keep feeding what has been feeding on you.